Hey folks, if you love true stories about extraordinary life experiences, we think you'll love the Risk podcast.
Risk is the show where people tell true stories that they never thought they'd dare to share.
Stories too uncensored for public radio.
On Risk, nothing's too intimate or too strange.
Like the one about the guy who gets kidnapped by a drug cartel.
Or the girl who discovered she was living with a cannibal.
Oof. Or the woman who learned the person she was sharing kinky fantasies with online was her dear old dad.
Yuck. You'll hear real people sharing about life experiences so funny,
so scary,
so mystifying,
you won't believe your ears.
Find it all at risk-show.com or just search on your podcast app for Risk. That's RISK exclamation point or risk-show.com.
And now for our regularly scheduled fucking awesome episode of our own.
Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Tracy Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse podcast. Ow!
What's up? Hey, I'm Elia Einhorn. Welcome back to the show. Today I'm joined here in Brooklyn by
Nick Dawson, Editor-in-Chief of Talkhouse Film. It's nice to be back on the podcast.
It's
Elia
been too
Einhorn.
long, Nick. It's been too long.
My time in Chicago just had to come to an end. So I'm here to get warm.
Yes, stay away from that polar vortex if at all possible. Nick, we have a very cool show today. Jon Cryer in conversation with Ben Lee.
I love it when friends and creative collaborators talk. This is a really fun conversation. I really enjoyed this.
Now, I have to tell you, Nick, I did not realize these guys had collaborated.
But they have, and it's quite a fascinating little story behind it as well.
Before we tell that, should we play perhaps a clip of one of the songs that they worked on together?
Definitely.
Let's do it.
Is your home a big mess? Will you drag to the show? Come on, man, confess. Here's my advice to you and to you. What you need is a brew, maybe two. Beer. My friends, take heed. A beer is just what you need. Now it should be clear that everything's better, everything's better, everything's better with beer.
That was a little ditty composed by Ben, sung by Jon, called Everything is Better with Beer.
From B is for Beer, the musical, which is based on the book by Tom Robbins and co-written by Tom Robbins, the legendary novelist, with Ben Lee. I mean, that's pretty awesome if you can go find one of your favorite writers, collaborate with them on a musical version of one of their lesser-known books, which you love, and bring all your awesome friends in to do it, which included Busy Phillips, Belinda Carlisle, Paul F. Tompkins, and of course, Jon Cryer, who is a beer vendor and who also was roped in to direct the show. And as Ben says, you can go find it on Spotify.
Nick, I'm hoping the show comes to Broadway, man. I'm in for sure.
At least off Broadway or off Broadway.
Yeah.
For it to be off Broadway would be an insult. Just a real insult.
Jon Cryer is, of course, best known for, I would say, Nick, and you're the expert here, one of two roles. Either Ducky.
Yes, in Pretty in Pink.
Or Alan Harper from 2.5 Men.
I want to give a shout out to the other project that he did with Charlie Sheen, Hot Shots, which is, I think, an underrated comedy classic. Hot Shots Part 2 is also pretty excellent.
Now, Ben Lee is a returning guest to the podcast, Nick.
He certainly is. We had him on before with his musical collaborator, Josh Radnor, and they had a really excellent chat with Rainn Wilson, their mutual friend.
Funny guys.
Very, very funny and fun conversation.
I'm starting to think Ben Lee knows everyone in Hollywood.
He kind of does. Yeah. I mean, there is a moment in the podcast where he talks about his daughter asking, like when she hears a song or watches a movie, do you know that person?
Yeah. Well, she's definitely being raised in a different way than he was. Ben is originally from Australia. From a very early age, he was a pretty renowned musician over there.
Yep. As a teenager, he was a BFD. Can we say that on the air?
We can say that. We can even say
BFD.
big fucking deal.
Big fucking deal. Big fucking deal.
Magic of podcasts.
Wash your mouth out.
Right. He had the band Noise Addict. He then went on to focus on his solo career when the band broke up. He's released 11 solo albums since, and most recently, he scored Lena Dunham's new show, Camping, which Ben's wife, Ione Skye, see, he even knows Ione Skye.
He must know her. They're married.
And she acts in the show as well.
She does indeed.
Nick, I thought it was really fascinating to hear Ben and Jon talk about having some pretty serious fame as a teenager and then transitioning to being a grounded adult.
Exactly. That thing of not really knowing who you are when people have decided who they think you are because you're really famous, and then becoming who you want to be.
Within that context, they talk about the setbacks and failures inherent in show business.
Oh boy, there's so many. And they've got stories.
They've got stories, man.
We also hear them talking about jumping off the cliff. Creatively speaking, of course. We're not endorsing any reckless behavior and, Acapulco or any other sort of seaside resorts.
Butlins.
For our British listeners, just for you.
It was cool to hear them talk about how a generation of songwriters creatively jumped off the cliff after Duncan Sheik's Spring Awakening. That sort of led directly to the aforementioned B is for Beer.
Apparently that show made musicals feel doable for a lot of musicians who were not in the sort of Stephen Sondheim, Rodgers and Hammerstein kind of my name ends with EIN mold.
Well, speaking of EIN and my name having an EIN in it, we hear about Ben's formative role in Uncle Moishe and his Mitzvah Men.
Definitely a classic. And how Ben copes with getting given all those demos when he goes on tour.
Jon tells us about his experiences on Superman 4 and Altman's OC and Stigs.
Two classics that are maybe classics for the wrong reasons. And Ben demystifies what looping in my manager actually means. I have heard that from time to time.
Spoiler. Not a great thing.
Not a great thing.
Should we roll the tape?
Let's roll the tape.
The reason I was excited I always love talking to you as
thanks,
friends.
man. And you.
And there's so much I admire about the way you've navigated being a human being in this funny industry, the business of show.
Oh, well, thank you. That is reciprocated. I feel the same way. Unfortunately, folks, this is going to be a love fest. We're not going to be fighting through the course of this. We should introduce something to have conflict over at some point.
Okay, let's sometime in the second act.
Okay, so that the sparks fly, and then you're worried about our friendship.
Exactly.
And then in the third act, we'll figure out a way to bring it all together. But thank you. That is very kind of you to say. But I feel very similarly about your artistic journey. And I don't want to, sound, full of it, but
using the word journey will pretty much ensure you do.
Yes, exactly. I have a mission accomplished, Jon. Because B is for Beer, for the uninitiated, was a book that Tom Robbins wrote that was a very odd sort of hybrid of a children's story, but for grown-ups. But it wasn't like snarky like Avenue Q or something like that used the style of a children's motif to just make, some very, very clever and wonderful and hilarious jokes. But B is for Beer was actually much more sort of sincerely spiritual. It was on a journey of discovery. And it's a book of Tom Robbins that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Even fans of Tom Robbins don't know about that book.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with it till I found it.
Yeah.
It was just not a book that you think of when you think of Tom's canon of work.
Yes, and it's one of his more recent things.
Yeah.
It's not in his general style, if he can be said to have a style. Yeah, I guess he has a style that's like uniquely his. But it's a lovely, interesting, odd piece, and that Ben had been spending years writing music on this. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking about you in the third person at this moment because there are listeners. But it's a remarkable commitment to a piece of work that, first of all, was a new thing for you to do because it's basically musical theater, which, to my knowledge, you had not partaken
Not at all.
in it at all. No, okay. And to do it with such a quirky project. I mean, of course, when you read it and you do it, you go, oh, of course, Ben should write music for this. But I was wondering, so you told me once about how you came upon it, but how did you get that connection with it that you said, okay, this is something I'm going to be spending a lot of time in my life bringing to life?
Well, it's funny because to understand why this project ever happened, this is like some sort of industry kind of stuff, but there was a shift that happened in musical theater right around Spring Awakening, where there was clearly a generational shift happening with both composers and writers and audience members that were going to see musicals. And the sense I was getting from my agents was, hey, if you're a singer-songwriter that writes lyrical music with good melodies, there's actually an opening here. And so it was very interesting. Like I remember the head of musical theatre department at what was then William Morris, I think there was a bit of a mandate to engage their lyrical singer-songwriters who were interested in exploring the field. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, it makes sense because also Tim Minchin had success with Matilda.
Yeah.
And Spring Awakening, that was Duncan Sheik.
Yes, exactly. It was funny because that musical was obviously incredible and really done with a very high level of artistry, but also for songwriters like myself, and I remember talking to Amy Mann about it, it also felt doable. Like there was something about seeing one of our peers work in that field and connect on that level that suddenly made it, because before, if you just think of like, I'm never going to be Stephen Sondheim, like there was a degree of like, maybe an intricacy or like just someone who had been steeped in musical theater that it felt like that's who that world belonged to. And the shift that happened was it was sort of like, the door was sort of open in a way. So I remember my antenna was kind of up. Like a lot of the way I think about careers is that like you can't control anything very much, but you can be open to certain eventualities or possibilities. And if once something comes into your horizon and you sense it as a possibility, it increases the likelihood of interacting with certain sort of specifics or certain moments that will bring that into reality.
The way that I've experienced the industry is really unusual. You know, I came of age in the 80s when there was this nice bubble of demand for actors just like me. And so I got lucky and I was actually able to make a living doing this way earlier than a lot of people get to. And I've, through luck and happening to have the right skill set that was necessary for various projects, I've had some that really worked. I've also done a lot of things that didn't. A lot of things that I went into as an artist with an open mind and open heart that did not achieve their artistic goals, that went awry terribly. But those experiences were also incredibly valuable to me. I mean, that was part of the reason I wrote the book. I wrote a book called So That Happened, which was about all the stuff that goes wrong, and show business is perfect for that because so much goes wrong. But again, if you take those experiences and build on them, then they didn't go wrong. Then,
right?
If you learn something from them.
But so, do you really feel that your initial success, like getting your foot in the door, basically, do you really feel like that was that much luck?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I didn't at the time.
That would almost be like, it would be like lower your self-esteem to believe that. Yeah.
Well, no, like I said, there was that great teen movie bubble of the 80s. There was a lot more jobs for young white guys than and only in retrospect do I go, oh, you know what? Probably for somebody who wasn't a young white guy at that time, there weren't nearly as many jobs. It's not as easy to break in. I also had the advantage of coming from a family that was in show business already, so they understood how ridiculous it was, and I already had a little bit of an infrastructure. My mom had a manager. Who had, by the way, never been a manager before. He was a lighting designer who decided. He basically he said to her, "Hey, do you want a manager?" And she was like, "Sure." It was like the most half-hearted business deal ever. But he sent me out on my first auditions. But most people don't have that. They don't have.
So were you not, because of that? Did you not find it sort of intoxicating, like the glamour? Like for me, the show business was so separate from anything I know that even if I met like a soap opera actor from Neighbours when I was a kid, like you'd bump into someone somewhere, I would like not be able to talk because it felt like someone coming out of a painting.
Yeah.
Like
From another
it's
planet,
so different
yeah.
than the way my daughter's growing up here.
Around artists all the time.
Yeah, but if she
and-
hears
yeah.
a song, she might say, "Do you know this person?" Do you know what I mean?
But
Or like
that's-
she'll be
yeah.
a movie. She might be like, "Do you know anyone in that movie?" Like not that she needs to meet them. She's just curious. It's so different.
And
It's
of course, that's the way it should be because,
Right.
of course, we're all just human beings and we like this
Yeah.
community and we know everybody. I meet actors, and it's so funny because I have the same thing where I still to this day where I meet people that I'm starstruck by. Still happens all the time. But of course, I'm in the community. I know these people. I know, and they're all just folks. And
But I guess what I mean is like coming from your mom's experience, did that allow you to keep somewhat more of a level head than
yes.
someone who moved from the Midwest with no idea of what, and just that it was all, do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes,
Like that, yeah.
absolutely. It also allowed me to deal with failure, with whatever setbacks. Failure is probably not the best word, but with it gave me the ability to understand setbacks happen all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. They're just a part of the experience. And, it's hard not to personalize them and say, well, this setback happened because I've brought this on myself because I just don't have the talent or I just don't, work hard enough or whatever. But being around it my whole life, I just, setbacks just always happen. Nothing happens smoothly. So, that is a great lesson to really understand.
I know it's amazing too as you become, because we both share that experience, as does my wife Ione, of getting recognized in your teens or young for your creative abilities or charisma or whatever it is, and then having to transition into adulthood away from being precocious and cute and actually having to like form a life. And I've found it to be an incredibly clumsy process, yet it's like when you meet someone that has taken that journey and done it with integrity and actually said, I'm willing to get my hands dirty and to go from whether it's from being a like out of the box movie star to being a working actor or being a musician that like had a hit early and they said, okay, I'm going to like go out on the road and prove myself and pay my dues. It's amazing to me. I don't know. I once heard this story. I went to a Jewish school. I feel like it was a Jewish story that it was like a rabbinical idea that at the end of your life, you look back and the problems that you transcended are like mountains you're on the other side of. And you think, how did I do that? And the mountains you didn't climb look like tiny hills. And you said, why didn't I do that?
Oh.
And it's something I've thought about a lot, that if I'd have known when I started making music and kind of like going for this dream of being a musician, if I'd have known how severely I would have to be humbled in order to become the man I am today who feels confident as a working artist, I don't know if I'd have had the guts to do it. You know what I mean? Like you hope that it's going to be, you get that beginner's luck if you're lucky. And you kind of, I think, live in a sort of denial that you're going to be the exception to the rule. And it's just going to keep flowing.
Yes. But that denial is helpful, I think, to some degree.
Because you wouldn't do it otherwise.
Exactly. But now, okay, when you were young and, before you met the neighbor's stars, so you grew up in a small town in a big city?
No, Sydney. I mean,
in Sydney.
Bondi
Okay,
Beach,
so you were a city kid.
Yeah.
And a musician. When did that grab you?
Well, it's like I had I used to tape songs off. We had music video shows on Saturday and Sunday mornings on TV, and I used to tape them, like with the tape recorder right close to the speaker. And then I would like sing on top of them and record it into another tape recorder. And that was going on from probably 6 or 7, 8 years old. And I remember there's one moment that only in the last couple of years I've realized how important this moment was. There was a musical, like I said, I went to a Jewish school and we did a musical called Uncle Moishi and His Mitzvah Men.
Sure.
And
Everybody knows that.
and they were auditioning. They didn't call it auditioning, but they had, it was second grade. So they had all the kids stand up and you had to sing Happy Birthday, everyone, because literally they had no idea who could sing and who couldn't.
Sure, that's
and
a
there was
good
a few
baseline,
kind of lead
yeah.
roles. So it was funny. I sung Happy Birthday. So second grade, so what was I, maybe 7 or 8, right? And I felt good singing the song, Happy Birthday. Like it felt good in my body. Like it's a melody, it's a vibration, and it felt good. Like I liked the way my voice sounded. And I noted that the teachers wrote something down when I said it. And at that moment, this link was formed. That to me is the moment that I became a performer, because it clicked that something that makes me feel good is making other people feel good. And what else is creative performance than that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had a similar moment when I was at summer camp, and it was a theater camp, but I was there not really wholeheartedly buying into being in show business. And I had a joke that I had to tell in a show called Earthlings, which is a kids show about ecology. And the joke landed. And that was the moment that I was like, oh, this is the connection I want to have with people. And I still, I love doing dramatic stuff as well, but getting the joke to land will always be that primal connection that always worked for me. So what made you transition to learning instruments, and was that something that your parents were...
Transitioning out of Uncle Moishe and his mitzvah man,
Yes,
getting
exactly.
the leading role, by the way.
What was your next career step after Moishe
By the
and
way,
his
I
mitzvah
would like to
man?
add, I did play Uncle Moishe, and I sang the song Ain't Gonna Work on Saturday. That was a big hit. I got into rock and metal. It was like Bon Jovi on the radio and Guns N' Roses and just pop music I remember listening to. I played piano. I did I call it the mandatory Jewish 2 years of piano. I mean, I have music in my family. Like my great uncle was the court violinist for Tsar Nicholas.
Seriously?
In Russia, yeah.
Wow.
And I have another uncle. I can show you some photos after. There's actually one on my desk there. He was a gypsy violinist called Sasha Berliner, and he used to play in this in Berlin in the 1920s and hung out with Einstein. He was this local so I have this sort of a European troubadour thing. You know what I mean? It's I only always says the way I eat. It's I do everything intensely. I do everything.
Is there just food scraps all around your
It's
mouth?
quick. It's quick. It's effective. I do everything I have a Russian peasant inside me. You know what I mean? It's everything I do. It's I'm going to do it. If I'm going to do a shot of alcohol, if I'm going to do exercise, I just do it. If I'm going to write a musical, so it was in the family, but. It's funny, the way we look back on why we started. I remember I was playing piano and I read, we had a magazine in Australia. It was a takeoff of a British magazine called Smash Hits. It was a big pop magazine. And in the back, I probably had one that was 3 months old. I don't know. I wasn't that keeping up to date. There was a little thing that said, win an electric guitar. Just, write a postcard to Smash Hits magazine. Mm-hmm. And I entered, and I was so convinced that I was going to win, and that the electric guitar was going to show up on my. It was it wasn't even. It was so funny. I didn't even enter it multiple times.
No, you were just this is the one.
I entered. I was oh, I want that ticket so badly that I must be the guy who's going to get it.
Yeah.
And I never heard back from Smash Hits, but what was awakened in me was that I wanted a guitar.
Yeah.
And that's the moment where I started playing guitar. I said to my parents.
I was so ready for that guitar is right here because we're in his recording studio. But no, not at all. But it made you, it showed you what you wanted.
It's a little clue. It was a little clue. And I was I couldn't deny it. Mm-hmm. It was, and it's funny because there would have been something else, I guess, if I hadn't seen that. It was such a weird, arbitrary thing, a competition to win an electric guitar in a magazine. But the desire, I mean, that's part of I just finished this job scoring Camping on HBO, which is the show my wife's in. And I wasn't aware I wanted to do that until Jenny Connor inquired if I'd be interested. And I said, yes, I would. And then I didn't hear back from her for a month. In that month, I realized how badly I wanted to do the gig, And sometimes it's the awakening of desire is what takes you on the next journey?
It's interesting because I have an 18-year-old son who's currently at college, and the biggest thing that scares me about him, and he's a wonderful kid, is that there isn't some driving passion for him. That he hasn't discovered that thing that he really wants. And because I realize it's such a gift. Oh my God. Even if it ends up being something that you don't achieve everything that you always wanted to achieve in, just knowing what you want and knowing the direction you want to go in is just this incredible luxury. Because I knew it by the time I was 12 or 13 or 14 when I had that moment, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have a career in theater, wherever that takes me. If that ends up me being a casting director, great. If I'm a performer, great. If I'm a director, great. But this is the thing I want to do. So what was the moment that, okay, you've got your guitar that not the one that you did not win that one, but you got one yourself.
Yeah.
There must have been a moment when you jumped off the cliff. When you're like, well, being a musician is going to be my life.
You know what? It was sort of quite significantly later because I did music concurrently with high school. I was able to maintain the illusion to myself even and to my family that I was sort of a normal kid. Like I didn't have to make a commitment the way you do later in life when there's like you have to pay the rent. And
exactly.
You have to do,
Yeah.
So
me too.
Yeah.
Come to think of it, I was auditioning like crazy.
And so you kind of are like hedging your
Yeah.
bets a little, and even just in terms of that emotional commitment of going, I am a whatever you are, you don't have to do it. And I remember for me when I was 18 or 19, my friends were all going to university from high school. And I started at 14. I'd already made albums, toured, like I had a thing going, And I was still under the illusion that I was going to go to university with all my friends and do music the way I'd done it through school, like in summer breaks. And I remember the timing was not working out with making the record. I wanted to make this album that became this record, Breathing Tornadoes, right before I started university in Australia. And it just didn't work, the timing. And I was having a huge amount of anxiety about it because it was interrupting. The idea that I'd have to make a choice totally interrupted the illusion that I could do everything. And I remember I called my mom and I was like, because a lot of it's about family and I called my mom and I said, it's not working out. They want me to make the album when everyone's going to uni. And she said, you know what? You can go to university anytime. Make the album. And we can all look back and say there's a lot of problems in our families. There's a lot of I think every single person was parented in a subpar way, one way or another. But that moment, the permission my mum gave me to not have guilt about making a proper choice at 18, I'm grateful for to this day.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And your mom wasn't involved in show business?
No,
in
no,
any respect?
my family, not at all. Not at all.
Uh-huh.
But what was that moment for you?
Oh, for me, it was a super easy choice for me because
you're making money.
Because when I was 18, I applied to 2 colleges. I was not particularly. My grades were so-so. I was going to a science school, Bronx High School of Science in New York City, which is great school for people into computer science or there's Nobel Prize winners and physicists and amazing school for people who are interested in that. I was not. So I was lucky enough to get into NYU and Boston University, but I started auditioning in my last year of high school for stuff, and I got lucky. I got offered a Broadway show as an understudy. And it was the kind of thing that I can do one or the other. I can't really go to New York University if I'm doing 8 shows a week, or even have to be on call for 8 shows a week. So it was just a matter of I was launching my life, and I was like, NYU isn't going to happen. And NYU was so expensive that my mother was relieved. And we were so excited about the possibility of me being this understudy in this show. It was Brighton Beach Memoirs, a wonderful Neil Simon play, and I was understudying Matthew Broderick, who was amazing in that show. He was the lead, and He won a Tony for it, and it was a stunning role from him. But it was such a coup that college being off the table was fine. That was really the moment off the cliff.
And you didn't have any emotional conflict because your mom was
my mom is
happy for
in the business. She was could not be more happy for me to get this opportunity. Actually, interestingly though, I got fired from that. I worked for about 6 weeks in rehearsals, and I was not in good enough shape. I didn't work hard enough. It was a huge part. We had a run through for the director. When you're an understudy, you don't actually rehearse with the director. You rehearse with the stage manager, and you rehearse with all the other understudies, and you only do that twice a week. So it's not like a normal rehearsal. Normally, if you're rehearsing for a play, it's 4 weeks every day. Wow. And that's and so after 6 weeks, which was really only 12 rehearsal
and you're doing
sessions,
a lot on your own, like trying to learn that.
And I'm trying to learn a lot on my own. I mean, the expectation for understudies is you come to the show every night and you watch the show and you memorize it. Right. And that's absolutely illogical. That is, the producers are absolutely right to expect that. I, however, was looking at it more as a rehearsal process. And so when we had the run through for the director after 6 weeks, I had to call for line a couple of times. I remember afterwards, the director didn't have any notes for me, and I was like, "Yeah, I just aced
just
that
one,
test."
You're fired.
Exactly. The next morning I got a call from my manager saying that you're done, and that was a real sort of jumping off the cliff moment for me because it was suicidal. But no, what happened was I had thankfully. The day I auditioned for Brighton Beach Memoirs, I also auditioned for a touring company of Torch Song Trilogy. And I got offered both of them in the same day. And I took Brighton Beach Memoirs because it was in New York and it was a much bigger part and it was, incredibly exciting. And when I got fired from Brighton Beach, the Torch Song people said, "Hey, we actually need somebody to take over in the New York production. Would you be willing to consider it?" And I said, yes. So I had... So even though I was just in the depths of despair about getting fired, very soon after that, I got offered another job. So that, and then I was just off and running. I was hopping from job to job. And as I said, there was a bubble of demand for young actors like me at that time. And so I just got in this groove of just getting a lot of things. And I got to work with Robert Altman. My first movie was actually with Robert Altman. And again, a misfire of a movie. And he had those, he had Health, and Quintet and, all these movies that were bizarre but very noble failures on his part. But mine was so awful that it never even got released. It was his. Was it really? It was called O.C. and Stiggs. It was a National Lampoon movie, and it was supposed to be his take on a teen comedy.
Wow!
And it was just, we were all improving around the basic structure of a script, and it just didn't work.
Did you see it?
I did. Well, it was taken away from Bob. It was re-edited by the studio. So it's difficult to tell whether, perhaps his version would have worked. I don't know.
Yeah.
But to my knowledge, his cut does not exist anymore anywhere. But the studio took it away and cut it. And I saw the final studio version, and it just didn't work. It should have been much funnier. It always came from a kind of mean-spirited place, and that was kind of the fun of it. It was these two very rebellious teenagers in the middle of this stultifying suburbia. So that it came from a dark place, but that tonally is really hard. Is really, really hard, and we just didn't hit it right.
It's also like another time when so much like something wouldn't come out at all. Like nowadays, there's so many platforms that even if something sucks,
it'll find its way out.
It's got a few names in it. Netflix will buy it for $1.
Yeah. But no, this was a big studio movie that they just buried. Wow. They did not want. But my point being that I could fail. When I saw myself, I thought, oh, I made some really big choices in this that I think don't work on film. And that's been something that I've done in a few projects where I decided, you know what, I'm going to go in a direction with this character. And if the director is on board with me, then, we have a great time. And sometimes that works. Pretty in Pink worked great. Made a lot of big choices in that. That did not work great. Superman 4 not so great. So you get involved with things and hopefully bring some positive energy to it and your creativity, and sometimes that'll blow up in your face. And you just have to live with it.
Totally. What something I wanted to ask you about was you've just got a great new job.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Supergirl asked me to be their Lex Luthor, which sort of makes you Lex Luthor in all the Berlanti shows, Arrow and The Flash.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you have to do it?
Well, no, I don't know if I have to. I'm only doing
possible.
Supergirl for three episodes, and so I don't want to assume. But that being said, one thing I love about Supergirl as a show is they've had a lot of fun with bringing in stuff from the connection that I had to Superman, which was the Superman movie, which was the Chris Reeve version, the first one. And Superman 4 was a heartbreaking experience for me because I went into it as a comic book kid, loving being a part of a big comic book movie and being up there with Chris Reeve, who when I was 14 or 13 when I saw Superman the first time, and it just transported me and was just, one of those amazing cinematic experiences for a kid. And that I could be a part of that just meant so much to me. And when the movie was a mess, they ran out of money and they had to cut huge chunks out of it because they couldn't finish the special effects in them, and the movie doesn't even really make sense. And it's one of those movies that's so bad that they did a "How did this get made?" about it.
And for people who are interested, you did an in-depth interview, which is a special episode of "How Did This Get Made?" about your experience. That people can listen. I was so interested hearing that.
Well, it taught me a lot about the business. I got to work with some people I revered, but also see how something that with even incredibly talented people can really not gel. And to see that my own, like to this day, there are people who like the character I played in that, but I watch it and I go, you know what? I made some choices that were kind of easy, jokey choices that I shouldn't have done.
You watch it regularly?
Yes, I basically I run it pretty much every night just to lower my self-esteem before I go to sleep. I feel like there's going to be a way I can honor this legacy, and that I'm getting another chance to do it is pretty thrilling.
But so one of the things that I admire about you is you love to work.
I do.
And
I do.
The life of an actor, even someone who's been on hugely successful shows and hugely successful movies, you go through periods of essentially being unemployed.
Yes.
And that's why I was so happy you got that, because I know
been
you love
for a while.
No, I know you love to work. And
I do.
I've seen you in between jobs a couple times, and it's I just wondered sort of because this is intimately connected to this theme of how to sustain yourself in the long game, is what tools you've built up to get you through those periods that don't involve totally losing faith that you're ever going to work again.
And that you have any relevance artistically to anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a certain amount of denial helps. I'm serious, it does. Because you can absolutely go down the rabbit hole of there is actually no logical reason that this last thing I did might be the very last thing I ever get to do. There's no, I can't point to a reason that that's definitely not true.
Yeah.
So you can go down that rabbit hole. Thankfully, I don't do that often. But also for me, what I always did was I did, and I'm going to use finger quotes, favors for people, which is, in New York, it was always play readings. Mm-hmm. Playwrights know you and know that you can say a line of dialogue without falling over yourself. So they need actors to help them. Student filmmakers need actors. When I went to film school at USC, and none of the other students knew how to cast their shows because they just were like, well, how on earth am I going to meet actors? I'm in Southern California. Where could I possibly meet actors? It's like, oh my God, throw a rock, you guys. But it was fascinating to me that they didn't realize that actors were everywhere. So for me, and as I said, when people would ask me for favors, it's always a little bit of a favor to me that they ask me because I love participating in these things. I always
You get to
learn
play.
something.
Yeah.
I get to play. The B is for beer was,
Yeah.
it was a favor. And it was very funny just to tell folks a little bit of the story. You were over at my house basically, and you brought up that you had written a musical. And I was like, oh, well, that's, first of all, my mom is a composer and writes musicals, and I know how effing hard that is. But you just tossed it off like, oh, I was minding my own business and I wrote a musical. And I said, well, that's great. I just did a concert reading of my mom's musical in New York. And he said, oh, what's that? And I described it. And he said, oh, we should do that for mine. And I said, yeah, you should. Great. Have a good time doing that. And he said, yeah, you can direct it. And I was like, I guess I can. And which I've never directed a musical
But to backtrack, the reason I asked you to was I said to you, you said, what are you going to do? And I said, oh, no, I was sort of thinking maybe a Largo workshop. And you said, that's a great idea. And the fact that you resonated with that, and for people who live outside LA and don't know what Largo is, it's a playhouse.
Yes, that's a very good term
for works in progress, whether it's comedy, music. I mean, it's an incredible community also, and the fact that you resonated with that being the correct next move and the place to explore it was like, but you know what's interesting to me about you saying yes, and everyone we dealt with, we had amazing people, Padgett Brewster and Laura Silverman and Stephen Weber in that workshop, and there's been a lesson I've been receiving through my adventures in show business, which is that when you ask someone to be part of something fun like that, there's two types of people. There's the people who give you a straight yes or no, and there's the people who say, looping in my manager. And those people are never going to do it.
So yeah,
they're not people that ultimately want to play. Mm-hmm. And there's what I see in like, whether it's the Largo community or UCB or, these various like creative communities around, is that I like to be part of the people who are up to play, which is I think what you do too. And like, when you see you popping up in, whether you were in Maria Bamford's thing, although these little things, it's my sense is that Maria probably texted you and was like, hey, Jon, would you do this thing? I don't know. Maybe it came through official channels.
No, actually, it was one of the writers on the show who had worked on a show with me and said, hey, we're looking for a fun
But that's
cameo.
that's an approach to being part of this industry and this community that not everyone shares. And it's not that there's a right or wrong. They're just different styles. But there are certain people that you can reach out to and they're not interested in having buffers from the creative experience and the intimacy of being part of a community. And I've started like watching for that really early, those signs of people wanting to prematurely involve their representation. Because I go, okay, I'm not going to waste my time.
Because that was an interesting lesson for me because even though I grew up in show business, I still had the same image of agents as, people who beat the bushes and look for a gig and, and they'll, knock on a producer's door and say, hey, there's this kid who's great. And that is not what they do, at least not in my experience. And I've had agents who I genuinely like and have a real rapport with. But generally, they, it's like in Tootsie when Sidney Pollack says, I'm here to field offers, which means that if people come to you with an opportunity, they're the ones who advise you and help you make a contract. And, and they're not the ones finding the opportunities for you. And in Los Angeles, at least, they're actually actively stopping the opportunities. It's seriously because they consider themselves gatekeepers and that it's their idea to keep projects that they do not consider the next good step for you from you. So I do suggest that for most people, if you want to approach artists, find a personal way to do so while respecting their boundaries and their space. But I admire hustle. I really do. I mean, if you've ever, a guy jammed a CD in your, I'm sure, in a parking lot, that must have happened to you.
I always listen to at least the first minute.
Yes,
but
because you have to live your life. Obviously.
It sounds small, but when I say at least the first minute, is within a minute, I'll know whether it's for me or not.
Exactly.
And I'll often listen to the whole thing. If it is, I'll listen to it obsessively. But now we're past the day of CDs. People more send you their SoundCloud or whatever. But when it used to be CDs, I'd come back from tour with a stack of 10 or 20 demos. And Ione would be like, I can't believe you're listening to it. Like, she's like, I've seen other musicians like literally throw them out the window.
Literally burn them in a bonfire on their lawn.
I don't want to end on like a dark area, but I did want to.
Have any of your relatives died recently? Is there any?
No, but I did want to
explore?
touch on, because I've actually been super inspired by your. I mean, I can only call it activism on Twitter, in the sense that you obviously feel a degree of passion and responsibility to continue to draw attention to what you feel are the shortcomings of the current administration.
What are you talking about?
But I'm just curious about how much of that is simply that you found a channel for your rage, and how much of it is an attempt to actually utilize platform and influence to affect people and change things, and
For me, I did not want to ever be political on social media.
You have failed miserably.
I have failed miserably. I really didn't. I like being an artist. I love people enjoying my work. I don't honestly want to know that much personally about the artists that I love. That you and I know a lot about each other's lives is a horrible thing. But no, it's like the art is the art. Yeah. And I want to enjoy the art. I don't need to know that this actor is a jerk. It's like I still love him. I still love the character he did. I don't want to know that this musician is horrible to people. I want to enjoy the music, So I don't want to preach to people. I totally get when they say, shut up, Hollywood, and I get it. I'm right there with you. I would love to shut up. Nothing would make me happier.
It sounds like a giant butt.
But the butt that comes up is, I grew up in New York City. For decades, we have been made aware that, unfortunately, the guy who's occupying the presidency right now is a con man, of dubious mental capacity, and has been involved in various money laundering issues, and he was actually fined for it. The Taj Mahal Casino was fined $10 million, and as a person familiar with that information, I felt like, well, somebody's got to say this. But for me, the big change also was I started working on this podcast with these amazing lawyers. They do a show called Undisclosed, which is where they look into cases of wrongful conviction. And that's not on brand for me at all. But they asked me to host sort of the talk show portion of the program. And it's been an amazing education for me, just in terms of, what people are really dealing with in terms of poverty and crime, and how they interact with the government, and how the government, through often well-intentioned ideas, ends up criminalizing whole swaths of the populace through, as I said, often well-intentioned ideas. And, I see the way the system works. And I had this conversation with my son who feels like, okay, in America, we don't have laws that are openly racist. And I said, well, there is a way for the system to still be racist without having openly racist laws. And unfortunately, you have to look at the breadth of the history of the United States, and how the racism was just baked into it for so long that just erasing those laws and saying, oh, we have the Civil Rights Act, that's all gone now. It doesn't work that way. It's so baked in that the effects of that are ongoing. I mean, people of color in this country have had their economic power decimated for almost the entirety of the history of this country. And that affects the criminal justice system, and that affects health, and it affects so many issues that somehow we have to deal with it. So I keep telling my son, listen, it's not your fault. It's really not. You didn't bring this about, but we do have a responsibility to try and fix it.
That feels like a good place to end, right? Don't you think?
Yeah,
that's more uplifting than the current administration. Anything you want to plug or drive people towards?
No, I'm
Give your
feeling-
address if people want to show up. I don't know.
Well, I would love for people to check out Undisclosed. As I said, I just host the talk show portion of it, and I've been in and out. Whenever I'm doing a job, I can't partake in the show. But I really think what they're doing is incredibly valuable. It's also just a beautifully made show. I mean, these stories are incredibly compelling, and because it's a podcast, they can go into just incredible depth. They did a series on the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and just brought in the whole history of law enforcement in Baltimore and the cultural history of it. And all of a sudden, it just slams you like it's amazing this didn't happen sooner, So I feel like they're really contributing to the world, and if people get a chance, I think they should absolutely listen to Undisclosed podcast.
And I will suggest you hop on your favorite streaming platform and listen to Beers for Beer, the musical. You can hear John as well as Laura Silverman, Belinda Carlisle, Paul F. Tompkins, Rose Byrne, Kerry Brothers, Alex Weiss. Also, I'm just going to keep going.
Yes.
Also, you should listen to Jill Sobiel's last record, Nostalgia Kills, that I produced, which I love, and watch Camping on HBO. It's 8 episodes, really dark, really stressful, really funny. And that's about it, man. Thanks for doing this. It was fun.
You, Ben. Thanks for asking, man. Super fun. See, you asked, and we just did. That's how we roll.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, man.
Ben Lee, Jon Cryer, thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
Thanks, guys.
Listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, definitely make sure to check out Ben's previous conversation
with Josh Radnor and Rainn Wilson, and just like dive into the archive generally. There is so much good shit.
It's been almost 5 years now, hasn't it?
Almost 5 years. We're going to have a big party.
Well, Nick, we started a little party over on Spotify. We chose 16 of our favorite episodes from the past, put those up, and we're now sharing each week's episode on Spotify.
It's like a party in your ears.
Over on our socials, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, what have you, there are some great pictures from the recording of this episode, which happened at Ben's house.
Guys just messing around.
Today's episode is recorded by Ben Lee at his studio.
And by Mark Yoshizumi at Hook and Face Studios in Brooklyn. And it was co-produced by Mark Yoshizumi. So talented.
The Talkhouse podcast theme song was composed and performed by The Range. Nick, what do we have coming up next week?
We have a Valentine's Day special.
Bonanza.
I thought you were going to say it's bananas, which it is.
It is bananas.
It's a bananas bonanza.
We have some of our favorite artist couples. That is, both sides are either musicians or filmmakers or actors in conversation about what it means to be half of an artistic couple.
It's a bananas bonanza.
Pluses and minuses.
Pluses and minuses. Snakes and ladders. Spiders and flies.
Till next week, I'm your fly, Elia Einhorn.
And I'm Spider here, Nick Dawson.
Bye.
See you later.